Hello class. What we are going to do in this exercise is to work through one of the problems in the textbook whose answer in the textbook answer key is actually incorrect. Some of you might have already discovered this. The error is somewhat of a slight one, but nevertheless there still is an error. So let us begin. Since the conclusion is a conjunction, there are a few different ways in which that conclusion could be false. G could be true and F could be false. G could be false and F could be true, or both could be false. That's a little too complicated for a starting point. There's a much easier, straightforward starting point. Since we're trying to make all of the premises true, take a look at the very first premise, M and P. In order for the premise M and P to be true, both M and P have to be true. So that's where we will begin. We're going to say that that premise is true, and we are going to place the truth values that make it true. M has to be true, and P has to be true in order for the claim M and P to be true. Now let's start plugging in those values. Well, let's start with P. On the next premise we have if R then not P. Well, if P must be true given what we've claimed in that first premise, then we have a negation of P in the second premise, so that the consequent in that claim, if R then not P, we're going to make that consequent then false since P is true. Since the consequent is false, in order for the entire conditional to be true, R must be false. Since we're going to make the consequent false, we're going to have to make the antecedent false in order to make the entire conditional true. So R must be false. By making R false, given that P is true, and given that the consequent is not P, the result is, for that premise, the value true. Now let's move on. We've given R the value of false in order to allow that second premise to be true. R appears then in the next premise, F or R. Well, given that it's a disjunction, since R is false, the only way in which that disjunction could be true is if F is true. So we have to give the value of true to F. So we're going to have to give the value true to F, since R is false, in order to allow the entire claim F or R to be true. Now let's move on. M is true. Now, since we have a conditional in that next premise, if G then M, well, in order for if G then M to be true, the situation is that G could really either be true or false. So what we're going to do is the following. Give G both possibilities. So where are we so far? If M and P are true, then the first premise is true. If R is false, given that P is true, and so we have not P as the consequent, if R then not P, where R is false and P is true, we have true for that entire claim. To the next claim, F or R. Since F is true and R is false, F or R would be true. And then lastly, given that the consequent M is true, it doesn't matter whether or not G is true or false. And thus, if we then look to the conclusion, if G is true, and if F is true, it would follow that the argument would be valid, but since G could possibly also be false and allow all of the premises still to be true, look at the following. F, we've been told, is true. M, we've been told, is true. P, we've been told, is true. And R, we've been told, is false. So we can delete this line. Let me just strike it out, since that first line does not represent a scenario where all of the premises are true and the conclusion is false. We have, however, just one scenario where all of the premises are true and the conclusion is false. It is invalid because, as you should understand at this point, if all of the premises are true, then the conclusion should follow from it. Since the conclusion doesn't follow from it, we say therefore that this argument is invalid. I understand that this part of the course is difficult. It requires a lot of concentration to follow these videos, and what you must do in order to make sure that you will do well on this test is to very thoroughly, carefully, clearly work through the many exercises that appear in the textbook and that have been added to D2L. Practice is absolutely crucial to this part of the course.